He wants to fire him, huh? Well, it's his prerogative, I guess. Huh? In the middle of battle? No, that doesn't sound smart. And while he's surrounded, wow. Yeah, let me know how it goes, okay? Bye. February 18th, 1951. Something new happens each and every week of the war. This is true for all wars. There's always something new. But this week, there's a first in this war that surprises a lot of people. This week, a huge force of Chinese troops is seriously defeated. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. 8th Army Commander Matt Ridgway's big counteroffensive, Operation Roundup, began last week on the 5th, but it was pretty short-lived because, as we left off in cliffhanger fashion, the big new Chinese offensive began on the 11th as the week ended and slashed through the UN lines. This is Chinese Commander Peng Dehuai's fourth phase offensive, and he has been directed from above to operationally advance all the way to Daejeon and kill up to 30,000 Americans or ROK, South Korean, soldiers on the way. Success would mean all the UN troops to his west would have to be pulled south to secure their flank. He plans to hopefully rout the enemy just as he did not that many weeks ago in the north. However, he knew there had been insufficient reconnaissance on UN positions, and unremitting aerial attacks on his overstretched line of communication had left him with low stocks of ammunition and rations in his forward areas than he would have wished. Many of his troops were sick, and casualties from the appalling cold and malnutrition had been very heavy in the preceding weeks. But he was under pressure from Mao Zedong as well as Kim Il-sung to resume the offensive. So unwilling he may be, but he's doing it anyway. The attack is two main columns, heading towards Hoengsong and Wonju. We've seen before that Wonju is really what Peng wants to take. For him, that's the key to controlling Central Korea. The PVA, the Chinese, hit the ROK troops first. They're over on the UN forces' right, and ROK 8th Division gets hit from multiple directions at the same time. They are not just surrounded, they are destroyed. By 1 a.m. on the 12th, as this week begins, communications are cut between 8th Division and all its regiments, as well as between the regiments themselves. Only around a third of the division, 3,000 or so men, of whom half are service troops, will make it out. The dead or missing number over 7,000. The ROK 3rd Division, on the other hand, does manage to withdraw and escape encirclement or destruction by the advancing PVA 197th Division. Now an issue comes into play. Any requests by UN units to withdraw are passed all the way up the chain of command to U.S. 10th Corps Command. 10th Corps Commander Ned Almond has distributed American units among the ROK to bolster them, and in the opening hours of this surprise enemy attack, they are badly intermingled just when the ROK are being routed. Here's the thing. This deference to Corps emphasized the command and control arrangement for which General Ridgway had expressed concern the day before. As a matter of orders, and as an eventual matter of practice, unity of command in Operation Roundup was vested in Corps headquarters, no lower. This arrangement worked well enough during the advance, but after the Chinese engineered the collapse of the ROK 8th Division, Corps control inhibited the American commanders of support forces and of units on the line of departure in reacting rapidly. So that advancing PVA 197th Division hits Support Force 21, supporting ROK 21st Regiment, around 1:15 a.m., right? Support Force Commander John Keith gets hold of 2nd Division Artillery Commander Haynes and asked to withdraw like 5 kilometers. Haynes gets hold of 2nd Division Commander Clark Nick Ruffner, who tells Haynes to call Corps. He does and gets hold of Corps Artillery Command, who then speak to someone in the Corps Chief of Staff's office, who then gets hold of Corps Commander Almond. Almond says, okay, withdraw. And this goes back down all these steps to Keith, who manages to start his withdrawal shortly after 3 a.m., which is pretty remarkable. However, the Chinese have by then blocked Route 29 and occupied the heights along it, and Keith is stopped by 4 a.m. His force then moves in fits and starts over a full day of bloody combat aiming for Hoengsong. Many will not reach it, among them Colonel Keith, who is captured. Both ROK 3rd and 5th Divisions the day of the 12th are being pushed back east of Route 29, and that afternoon Allman tells Ridgway he's going to give up Hoengsong and defend Wonju. The night of the 12th, the UN forces pulled back from Hoengsong. And it's the Netherlands Battalion, which is basically 2 rifle companies, who are the rear guard, holding off many times their own number of Chinese. The Dutch vacate Hoengsong around 1 a.m. Chinese occupy it, and then make no moves to pursue the UN forces. UN casualties between dusk the 11th and dawn the 13th are 9,844 for the ROK and 2,018 for the rest. That's 11,862 in just like 36 hours, plus 34 howitzers, 1,178 crew-serviced weapons, 6 tanks, and 368 other vehicles. Ridgway is initially concerned that these losses are the result of poor leadership. He writes Allman the 13th, "While there is nothing sacrosanct about a piece of artillery compared to the loss of the lives of men, I don't expect to hear again of such loss as reported to me this morning. It is a prima facie indication of faulty leadership of serious import in some echelon." However, both his and Allman's investigations will show that this has not been the case. Allman has his work cut out for him, though, preventing the Chinese from reaching the Han River or Wonju. Remember the 27 Commonwealth Brigade? Well, its headquarters is currently a short way northwest of Yeoju. It's been beefed up lately. There's the Indian Field Ambulance and a regiment of New Zealand artillery. And sure, their 24 big guns are obsolete 25-pounders, but you know, they can still kill people. Brigade Commander Basil Coad is in Hong Kong at the moment, so Andrew Mann of the Middlesex is in charge just now. They're deployed north of the Han already the 11th, but are sent to dig in, or try to, in the frozen ground on the road to Chipyong-Ni the 12th as pretty urgently needed reinforcements. Lately, the brigade has just been guarding 9th Corps headquarters, so they go from boring to holy shit in just a few hours. The brigade also goes under the command of 10th Corps and are now fighting once again under 2nd Division. Chipyong-Ni is a road and rail junction. Okay, the recent UN offensive was spearheaded by Paul Freeman's 23rd Infantry. Now, already back on the 3rd, his regiment moved into Chipyong-Ni after the Battle of the Twin Tunnels. It's actually a regimental combat team, which also includes a French battalion, a ranger company, some engineers, and the 37th Field Artillery. And they were still in Chipyong-Ni when the Chinese began flooding south the 11th. Thing is, 2nd Division Commander Ruffner does not have enough force to man the whole line, the 30-odd kilometers from Wonju to Chipyong-Ni. So there's a gap, leaving Freeman's regiment isolated. But now, with Chinese units streaming past his perimeter on both sides, Freeman gets hold of Allman and asks if he can withdraw 25 kilometers to avoid being surrounded. Allman thinks this is a sound idea and sends it off to 8th Army Commander Matt Ridgway. Ridgway's response is unrepeatable for the most part here, but it boils down to one word: no. Chipyong-Ni must be held. In fairness, it is not just Ridgway. UN Forces Commander Douglas MacArthur chooses just then to visit Korea again from Japan and tells Ridgway to hold strongly to the Han River line. MacArthur actually just submitted a report to Washington on the 11th that had a part calling "holding at the Han." Losing Chipyong-Ni would put that in serious jeopardy. But can Allman get force up there to relieve Freeman? Well, they try. An American recon force, including some Chaffee tanks, heads up the road the 12th, though they are warned of the many Chinese in the hills on both sides of the road. When they hit a roadblock, they withdraw to Chuam-Ni, and then, and I'm going to quote Michael Hickey's The Korean War because I just don't get it, instead of picketing the high ground overlooking the village, they settled down for the night, lit fires, and apparently failed to post sentries. Most of them are caught by the Chinese in their sleeping bags. Those who run are chased down, and they are slaughtered. Many of them have their throats cut. About 30 of them manage to return to the UN lines after a few days. That's it. They leave behind 3 light tanks and a dozen jeeps as well. However, that is really about the best kind of mechanized relief force you can send. The hills are steep, so tanks can't maneuver, and they're easy targets, so you'll need infantry support. So the Commonwealth Brigade are sent forward next. They dig in at dusk the 13th, though, expecting the Chinese to attack again by night. That is, in fact, what happens. After 4 a.m., when the moon has set, a battalion of the PVA 119th Regiment hits the 2 forward Middlesex companies and hits them hard. The fighting is bloody, but the defenders hold, and when one of their forward positions is overrun and captured, they manage to counterattack and free it. The Chinese withdraw with the dawn. But there is heavy fighting at Chipyong-Ni. Freeman has called in his commanders and told them, "We're going to stay here and fight as per orders." And that night, they do. There's skirmishing and there's probing, and then around 2 a.m., the Chinese run into the French battalion. And now, I'll briefly sidetrack about the French battalion. France is pretty heavily engaged with the communist forces in Indochina just now. Just a couple months ago, our old friend from World War II, Jean de Latreille de Tassigny, took over as commander and high commissioner there, and built up a new line of fortifications from Hanoi to the Gulf of Tonkin, just in time to fight off a new counteroffensive last month. The French were seriously outnumbered, but much as has been the case at times here in Korea, French aerial supremacy won the day. Or aerial supremacy. Not French in Korea, but you understand what I mean. That conflict will eventually be covered on our brand new War to War series, which is why I mention it. This series began at the start of this month on our Time Goes History channel, so go and check that out. France, being, pretty busy, has only sent 1 battalion to Korea, and this is it, commanded by Ralph Montclair. And it's pretty good. They arrived here November 29th and were assigned to Freeman's regiment. Recently, they fought at Wonju and the Twin Tunnels, and now they're getting hit again here at Chipyong-Ni. As the first platoon of Chinese rushed them, a Frenchman cranked a hand siren, setting up an ungodly screech. A single squad fixed bayonets, grabbed up hand grenades, and when the enemy was 20 yards away, came out of their holes and charged. 4 times the number of CCF stopped, turned, and fled into the night. The Frenchmen went back to smoking and telling jokes. The perimeter holds that night. The Chinese pull back. And on the 14th, nothing really happens during the day in the field here, and the Air Force blankets the hills with napalm and rocket fire, while airdrops resupply Freeman. But that night, it is the unfortunate George Company, who were attacked 4 times the previous night, who are hit again and hit hard. Many of the young men break and try to run and hide. Many stay and fight. The whole perimeter is actually unattacked, but the main attack is against George Company. It's not a simple, overwhelming attack in force, but a methodical move against each foxhole, blowing the men out with satchel charges and slowly clearing the ground of Americans. The tide is irresistible. Eventually, the last American machine gun jams, and 6 men manage to back off the little hill from the Chinese onslaught. That's who's left. And the Chinese now have a direct route into the center of the 23rd Infantry, a hole, even if the rest of the perimeter still holds. All they have to do is exploit it. However, the heartbreaking effort to spring George Company had left the Chinese spent too. Their communications, horns and bugles, could not pass the word fast enough, coherently enough, that the bung had been started, and that the Chinese wave might now flow through the hollow of Chipyong-Ni. The Chinese could crack a line, but a force lacking mechanization, air power, and rapid communications could not exploit against a force possessing all 3. Freeman has his artillery pump a continuous volley into the gap and sends in his reserve. 1 company of Rangers and 1 platoon from Fox Company. Screaming bloody murder, they advance on George Company's Death Hill. The fighting at the crest is brutal, and it is in the Chinese favor. The Americans are knocked off the hill, taking some 75% casualties. The Chinese then try to advance, but now the dawn comes. Freeman sends over the rest of the Rangers from their perimeter post, realizing that losing here means losing it all. All day the 15th, the Chinese pound against a wall of steel. They cannot break it. A proper relief column has by then been assembled. Task Force Crombez under Marcel Crombez of the 5th Cavalry. A company of tanks backed by 3 infantry battalions, artillery, and engineers. It faces serious resistance heading north to Chipyong-Ni. But despite heavy casualties, especially among infantry riding on the tanks, Crombez pushes on and reaches the town late in the afternoon. The fighting the 15th really is constant, but the armor also really helps Freeman's forces. The Chinese do hold their little hill until the sun sets, and then withdraw and fade into the hills. A snowfall then begins, dusting the thousands of dead comrades they've left behind. The morning of the 16th, all is calm. Why am I talking so much about this? A small-ish thing. The fight for a little hole, a little breakthrough in what is a little perimeter, giving over like a third of the episode to it. It's because the fight here is pretty important symbolically. You see, here, amid the ruins of Chipyong-Ni, on February 16, 1951, the Chinese offensive has been blunted, and this local action I just went over might well presage the future, for this is the first time that the Chinese forces have suffered a tactical defeat at American hands. A couple of side notes to the Battle of Chipyong-Ni. Freeman is actually wounded just before dawn the 14th, taking mortar shrapnel in the calf. It's not life-threatening, and he even still visits forward positions afterwards. But Ned Allman sees it as an excuse to finally remove Freeman from command, which he wants to do, in the middle of a battle, when surrounded and short on ammo. The senior officers in 2nd Division are furious. They're appalled even, but not as much as Freeman is. There is, however, not much he can do about it, and Allman's operations officer, John Childs, is sent in to relieve him of command. Freeman manages to not be around when the plane arrives, which is supposed to evacuate wounded like Freeman on the return journey. Childs, for his part, is smart enough to let Freeman run the show the 14th and 15th. He officially takes command the 15th at midday. Freeman will be sent back to the States to recover. As for Task Force Krombez, in the annals of the Korean War, few incidents are as controversial as that of Marcel Krombez's final dash to the rescue at Chipyong-Ni. Yes, he got there, and he got there in time. And yes, what he did was what Matt Ridgway had ordered him to do. But there was an unnecessary recklessness to it, which resulted in unnecessary losses among the infantrymen who accompanied him that many involved felt reflected an almost cavalier disregard for their lives. That he had put the mission above the proper care and treatment of his own men angered those infantrymen who survived and left a bitter aftertaste in the accounts of historians who believe the same results could have been achieved with far fewer casualties. It raised one of the great questions of command in wartime. Does elemental success in a crucial battle excuse all other figures and lapses? And if you succeed, are there other issues you should answer to? Certainly food for thought. But that's not all the action this week. There is fighting to the west as well. Thomas Brody's 29th Independent Infantry Brigade has been assigned to U.S. 1st Corps to clear the Chinese bridgehead east of Seoul and south of the Han River. There is a fairly steep range of little hills here that command the road heading north. Brody sends the Ulster Rifles up to relieve U.S. 5th Cavalry, and they occupy their positions. Now, on the 15th, a small patrol of 4 Ulsters is ambushed by the Chinese and captured, but 2 of them are returned a few days later. Say, what? It seems the Chinese were going to shoot these guys, thinking them Americans. Then they took out their British papers, and the Chinese officer warmly shook their hands and released them on their merry way. Cute story, but the Chinese do patrol around the 29th positions every night and hold Hill 327, which is the key to the high ground. The Gloucesters get the call to tackle this. This is actually their first battle here. They've so far only skirmished with guerrillas. However, a lot of these guys are reservists who saw plenty of action in World War II, so they know how to fight. The terrain is terrible, with the ascent nearly vertical at times. The infantry do have their own mortar fire controllers with them though, so massive mortar and artillery support and Bofors guns mounted on trucks in the valley below force the Chinese off the summit as the infantry steadily advances. The week ends though with the Chinese still holding the topmost ridge. There is also action in the ROK 3rd Corps sector and fighting that nears Wonju, but that I will have to backtrack and cover next week. But in any case, by the end of this week, the Chinese have withdrawn all along the line. Yep, by this evening, all evidence shows the KPA and PVA forces are withdrawing from their salient in the center of the peninsula. This isn't really a surprise because these guys, especially the Chinese, have a pattern of withdrawing assault forces after a week or so of battle for refitting. So the week ends with a lot of action involving a lot of troops from a lot of countries, and the Chinese losing literally thousands of their best troops against a far smaller enemy force at Chipyong-Ni. Oh, also, on the 16th, UN naval forces, mainly American, begin a blockade of the port of Hoengsong. This will likely tie down a fair amount of force up in the north. The following is from the U.S. Army historical series Combat Actions in Korea by Russell Googler. You can find it online. This has to do with the fight at Chipyong-Ni, where he says the Chinese suffered their first defeat of the Korean War. It's about some general tactics. If the commander of an attacking force disregards casualties, he will usually be able to attain at least local successes. The commander of defending troops faced with such an opponent must be prepared to limit any such successes. He holds the shoulders of any penetration. He uses supporting fires and positions in depth to blunt, slow down, and finally to stop the spearhead of the attack. Once the penetration has been contained, the defending commander then counterattacks to eliminate it. A counterattack plan is based on the answers to these questions: when, where, how many. Prematurely launched counterattacks meet the enemy head-on, before the enemy attack has lost its impetus, and before the enemy has been softened by fire. Tardy counterattacks meet the enemy entrenched and reinforced. Thus, ill-timed counterattacks, no matter how gallantly executed, often fail. Okay, he writes this describing the success Freeman's group had against the Chinese. But what I find interesting is that he then ends with this: the entire reserve should not be committed to action until necessary, nor should a boy be sent to do a man's job. No, he shouldn't. But this is the problem. Hundreds of thousands of inexperienced boys have been sent to Korea to do a man's job. And yeah, a lot of them are going to run away. And yeah, a lot of them are going to die. Hey, I mentioned that new War to War series on our Time Ghost History channel, and you must check it out. A link will soon come up here in just a few seconds. That series and this series and all of our series are produced thanks to the Time Ghost Army. That is right, all we do. Time Ghost Army member of the week is Juhani Lane, and these are the newest commissioned officers. You too can join the Army and be part of all of this at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.